When a story ends and another story picks up in that same world, there's typically a connecting theme between the two, something that ties them together beyond simply being placed in the same world, or the second story being something that happens far after the events of the first one. This is the case for Nintendo's Legend of Zelda series, where each iteration of the story has a major connecting theme that can be seen in every single one of them to date. There's always a hero, there's always a princess, and there's always darkness. Is more or less the theme that makes up the foundation of every single one of the game's stories, and that'll be what I'll examine. Specifically what exactly the theme means for the game world itself, how people in the story react to it, and what happens when the theme isn't repeated. I'll also touch on the before and after aspects as to when that theme begins, and what happens once it ends before it repeats itself once more. Essentially finding the true theme that connects all of these stories together. And to begin with, we first have to examine what it exactly means by there's always a hero, princess, or darkness. To clarify, we'll say that each story that the games follow has this foundation in the tale where the main character, Link, the hero, is always there. In every game where you play as Link, there's always someone that fits the position as the princess, typically being Zelda herself. As for darkness, there's always some sort of major conflict that covers the entire game, typically causing conflict within Link or Zelda's main story, before it becomes a threat to the entire country they live in, or perhaps even the entire world, which is usually called Hyrule. These conflicts and the characters are what make up the foundation of the game's themes, but they're not always the same people, or the same type of conflict overall. And the reason for this, and maybe a thing that actually surprises some people if you've never heard of Zelda before, every time the theme is present in each game, it's rarely the same people. It's rarely the same Link, or the same Zelda, or the same darkness that is going across the land causing mischief. But at the same time, despite this, Link always seems to be a child or a young adult that's dragged into the mix. Zelda's always a princess who suddenly received powers or visions for the upcoming threat, and the darkness kind of varies from game to game. However, from almost every game, it typically has at least one major source, and that is a character called Ganondorf, who is the only one that constantly comes back as the source of all evil, but even he is replaced a few times in the stories where he's unable to come back or where he just didn't exist yet. This can be seen in games like Minish Cap, where there's the evil sorcerer Vaati, or Majora's Mask, where the darkness in that story is actually someone from a completely different world, and for once isn't connected to Ganondorf at all. Because with other times where Ganondorf doesn't appear, Ganon, his alter ego, is usually in the background, pulling the strings of the dark theme that is taking over that game's story. But anyways, we're not focusing on why the theme exists, we're only focusing on the theme itself. And we'll be skipping over why that is, and instead focus on what this theme means for each character that's involved, after discussing the theme itself a bit more. And the reason I say this is because we don't care what the darkness is, only that there is a darkness, at least for this video. So to begin with, the main thing we need to consider about the theme is that each beginning of the story always has three requirements: the hero, the princess, and darkness, which could be taken a more worldwide or at least countrywide threat than anything else. This forms an almost religious view over time in the game's stories, resulting in many people treating it as a sort of prophecy that will always come true. An example of this is almost in every game, creating a legend to tell of the hero's return when it is threatened, or even create a tradition based on the legend itself. The beginning of Wind Waker is a good example of this, where the hero of that story is given the traditional green outfit on his birthday that is said to be the hero's clothes, and he is told by his own grandmother that it is the day he become the same age as the young hero spoken in all the legends. This kind of mentality greatly affects the characters actually involved in the story, and even their views on the three aspects directly involved in the theme, as all expectations of the world itself is pushed down onto them, for better or worse. Link, for instance, is almost always someone who's just living a peaceful life when his world is turned upside down and by some major threat. This can be seen in a majority of games, but the best example is, again, in Wind Waker, which was written by Mitsuhiro Takano and Hajime Takahashi. But in this one, Link starts out as a simple boy living on an island, sleeping at his days and occasionally training with swordplay with an old man that lives on the island, mostly for no real reason other than it being just a tradition that they do. And he also has a little sister that you see right at the beginning, running up to him and wishing him a happy birthday, making him run back to his old grandmother that takes care of the two, and also gives him the traditional present that we mentioned earlier. Everything just seems so simple to him overall, and it's very easy to relax in this part of the game, exploring the whole island and just experiencing everyone that just lives beside him and has pretty much known him all his life. But then out of nowhere, his sister is stolen by a giant bird, and that is controlled by the darkness of the story that pretty much sets off a chain reaction of Link abandoning his home, leaving everyone behind in order to go and save his sister. The happy days we are only given a taste of, and that Link himself has spent most of his life enjoying, just disappear altogether, and he has to go across the entire world from island to island in order to find strength and allies to save his sister from the place she was now being held against her will. And through this, he also encounters various places that were also attacked by this darkness, affecting the world, and each of them are seemingly helpless in stopping it without Link's help, in almost every way. But through these adventures, it gives Link more allies and more tools to complete his mission, all while making it clearer and clearer as time goes on that the world will never be the same for Link. In a way, it's a way for Link to grow up, but not exactly in the way he probably would have liked to, due to the circumstances being forced upon him by his sister kidnapping and everything else that goes on in the game, that constantly put him on the edge of his life and almost get him killed multiple times. And despite what I said being more or less unique to Wind Waker, this kind of pattern happens to almost every Link in every single game. He always begins with a simple, happy life, but someone threatens his home or family, resulting in the would-be hero having to abandon everything he knew, just to keep it safe. You can see this in Twilight Princess, where his village is attacked by monsters and his friends are taken away, or even A Link to the Past, where his uncle walks out in the night and, out of worry, Link follows him only to find him dying in the depths of the castle, living long enough just to pass the torch on to Link, but still more or less dying in his arms. To constantly lose something just to start his journey is an aspect of Link's tale that isn't really shown to anyone outside those he wishes to protect, or the player, which brings us to the next character affected by the theme, the people of Hyrule. In each story, the theme is actually told as a legend to those that live within the world. It is always said that a man, a knight, will appear and right the wrongs of the world along with the Princess of Hyrule. This is actually what results in a religious belief created from the idea alone, and more often than not, the characters in the story will push any form of conflict onto Link himself. They will see him as a hero that will save them, rather than a man who stood up on his own. This can lead to an actual disconnect with Link and the rest of Hyrule, due to none of them making much comment on his past, unless they're personally affiliated with him, such as a friend from before the story began. Not many characters who see him as the hero will ask him about his past, or what he plans on doing afterward, and a small example of this can be seen in the Hyrule Historia, that covers all the Zelda games and the supposed timeline, but more interestingly touches on what happens to the hero in the game Ocarina of Time, written by Shigeru Miyamoto. In the Hyrule Historia, it claims that the spirit you can meet in the game in Twilight Princess is actually the regretful spirit of Link from Ocarina of Time, who tells the player that he regrets being forgotten to time and never having anyone to pass on his skills in swordsmanship. Despite being one of the better heroes in the series, and arguably maybe the most popular Link of any of them, there's hardly any focus on who he was before or after he became a hero, at least not in the game. The actual history of this specific Link is the most tragic of all I've explored too, as he's arguably the Link that had to give up the most in order to complete his quest. The loss of his home, and being told he was never what he thought he was, after spending years feeling out of place to begin with, and then he had to be constantly on the move in order to save Hyrule in his journey of a fool's quest, being forced to realize that, in some way, it was all for nothing. Because Hyrule would fall. People he knew and people he didn't know would die because he wasn't strong enough as a child. He learned he could stop Ganondorf, stop the darkness from ruling Hyrule, but his heroics would not be remembered in the timeline he was sent back to, where he returns to being a child, resulting in the loss of another close friend, who leaves for unknown reasons. No one really knew what he did at that point, at least not in the timeline he was left in, and the one person who did, the one person who saw everything he did and was there beside him the whole time, left.
Hey, listen!
Those that did know his story that remained behind didn't know the whole story, and in most cases weren't even people he could affiliate with a princess that could only say, like, yeah, this guy is my friend, or Kokiri that could never grow up. Link was more or less alone. And in the other timeline where he left, he was only known as a faceless legend. He was not given any past or future, because to them, he just disappeared. He just showed up, saved Hyrule from Ganondorf, and basically restored it to its former glory, only to disappear when they needed it most. Whereas in actuality, he simply wanders away after dealing with the loss of his close friend, and according to the spirit in Twilight Princess, he never passes down what he learned. The Hyrule Historia claims that he did get a family, but there's no real proof on whether or not that's true in the game itself. And then in the most recent game, Breath of the Wild, written by Akihito Toda, it touches upon what the hero is expected to do as well, resulting in Link's character in that game to be affected in a way that is typically thought to be just a joke, or rather a way to have the character be something that the player itself can put themselves into. And this is seen in how in most games, Link does not speak, but in Breath of the Wild, it's revealed that he does not speak in order to keep people satisfied. He was raised, possibly from birth, to be Zelda's knight, and be the hero that saves Hyrule from the upcoming threat that has been prophesized for years, prior to the game's beginning. He was never told he could be anything but a knight, and over time accepted that fact and went silent, becoming the silent knight that would only protect the princess. This is something that's not even told directly to the player, but must be found within a journal. This journal was written by Zelda herself, who claims the admission from Link to have taken nearly a year to get out of him. Stepping back to Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, the opposite side of the story can be seen, in where instead of ignoring Link's beginning and what he was before he became a knight, they ignored his ending. As I said before, after Link's job was complete and Ganondorf was defeated, his story became almost unimportant to the population at large. As said before about Twilight Princess, which reveals the future of Ocarina of Time's outcome, his ability to stop the threat was not even recorded by those that knew what happened, which occurred before Twilight Princess, of course. Only the princess truly knew of his success, and no one cheered his name at large, even years after he left the land in order to pursue a personal quest. And as for Wind Waker, they cheered his name because they knew of what he did, but he disappears at the end of the story and became merely a legend. They treat him as something that children should imitate instead, giving young boys the same outfit as the hero wore so many years ago, and most likely giving girls the same dress that Zelda wore. That's all they do to respect his memory and what he did for them, all seeming to understand that he will be back at some point once the world is threatened once again. And yet at the same time, there's no records to find out where he went or why he disappeared in the first place. Only that he had been around to protect the land, and now he wasn't here. All of this is actually the true theme of the games. People became so blinded by the religious beliefs that they would be saved by someone that it overwhelmed them entirely, and that the hero is treated more as a means to an end than anything else. More often than not, only his close friends see him in a positive light that isn't for self-gain, and while many are thankful for what he did, they rarely show gratitude beyond a minor thanks, or, well, a piece of heart. But who needs those? Legends come and go, of course, and it's possible Wind Waker's version of the legend that had been simply lost over time, which is understandable given that the world itself floods in that game. But the reveal of Breath of the Wild treating Link as a knight that must protect Hyrule seems to suggest otherwise. It pushes the idea that Link is merely another tool to subdue the darkness and assist Hyrule in any way they see fit. Because only he can wield the Master Sword and to seal it away. Only he can rise up to defeat monsters and demons. Only he can deliver chickens because a girl taking care of them is allergic, and everyone else in town is too busy, and this guard just doesn't care that one's pecking away at his boots, because who cares if the chicken's pecking away at your boots? That girl's allergic, you shouldn't help her, Link will do it. The hero will take care of everything. Why the heck should I lift a finger? I don't get any chicken fingers for lifting a finger for these chickens. And, moving on. This sort of thing is also not just seen with Link and how he's treated, but also the way the darkness is treated as well. He's treated more as a beast, even though the most reoccurring threats, Ganondorf, was just as human as the rest of Hyrule. While the overall origin of Ganon's madness is a different subject, Ganondorf has been humanized several times in Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and even Twilight Princess. His entire ploy was dark and ruthless in Ocarina of Time, but had a foundation that many could sympathize with had they taken the time to understand it. While we never got the true insight on how the King of Hyrule handled it, it's heavily implied that Ganondorf sought the power of the gods not just for his own sake, but for his people, his sisters. He wanted to free his kingdom from the wrath of the desert, where the heat and sand would kill many of his sisters every year, and thought that the power to crush Hyrule would give him that foothold for his people to survive. He became the darkness because of this, and the lack of anyone understanding that until he was more or less lost in his own madness, and too far gone to care. But then after that, he became simply an aspect of evil to the people at large. They had no more sympathy for him and only treated him as a threat. Wind Waker, once again, gives insight due to how the King of Red Lions, also known as the King of Hyrule, treats Ganondorf throughout the game. He says that Ganon was the Emperor of the Dark Realm, and the ancient legends speak of him and how he threatened the world at large with his evil magic. He even hesitates to say his name, giving the full impression that he views him as nothing more than the Lord of Evil. despite the fact that he brings no harm to the girls his bird accidentally kidnaps, and even kept them fed and warm. When he didn't need to, he is seen by the King of Red Lions to have no humanity left in him at all. He is simply evil, and that's all there is to it. And then, flip the three-sided coin another way, in Zelda's case, she's always given the role of support, and is looked down on for being anything more than that, as doing anything else might disrupt the prophecy in some way. This is touched on often in Breath of the Wild, where her own father says, "As the princess, you currently have a crucial unfulfilled responsibility to your kingdom," claiming that she's just treating everything as a childish game, in regards to how she wishes to study things that may help them against the threat, rather than relying on the power she obtains from the prophecy, which, at that point, hadn't even appeared yet. Whereas in other stories, she's treated as even less than that, and treated as a damsel in distress, even when she can clearly take care of herself in the same manner that Link can, sometimes even better. Wind Waker again proves this alone with Tetra, arguably the best incarnation of Zelda, who spends the entire game proving herself to be confident, independent, sympathetic, and strong. She goes straight after the Lord of Forsaken Fortress to help Link, albeit due to Link's urging and a few smart remarks from a birdman nearby. And after that, she sees Jabu Jabu's island being completely destroyed by Ganondorf and realizes that Outset is next, because that's where the fish retreated to. Something she tries hard to stop in her own way, but once she knows Link is not only alive, but on the job, she more or less drops it for him to handle, and we only see her again during the raid on the Forsaken Fortress itself, where she boldly comes to Link's rescue. The entire game up to this point shows that Tetra could have been a constant ally throughout the game, rather than just a one-off character we get advice from here and there, via the little magic stone she slipped into our pocket. And yet after going hand-to-hand with Ganondorf for a brief moment, she's forced to back into the role of Zelda, by the King of Hyrule himself, who completes her Triforce of Wisdom and turns her from Pirate Queen to Delicate Princess. Her attitude instantly shifts from this, and it's somewhat understandable, of course, but her nature does a 180 right there, and she completely accepts being locked away in the depths of the castle, away from her pirate crew, just so Ganondorf can't get his hands on the Triforce of Wisdom, which was literally just forced upon her. Yes, she did have a shard, but seriously, if this guy had the piece of the Triforce of Wisdom the whole time, and has literally no power right now, why'd he complete it? That just made it easier for Ganondorf to grab it, and made Tetra a bigger target. Maybe I should go on a rant how every king of Hyrule seems to either be a complete jerk or really dumb, and deserves to be called the real antagonist whenever they show up. But that's another video. Anyways, sorry for getting off topic. But it's these factors being in Wind Waker, which is supposedly a passing to the next generation story, acts as a tie-in for previous generations influencing the world. Ganondorf himself is just a relic from the past, causing chaos across the world, and then the King of Hyrule acts as another mirror to the past. In my personal experience, this point of the game is my least favorite part. The sudden loss of all Tetra's personality as she becomes a meek, subdued girl instead of her usual confident self was like a slap in the face. Even if she does return some of this confidence later on, it takes until the end of the game to bring that full circle, and even then, she doesn't really seem like herself. I guess it's just really hard being a pirate in a dress. All of these aspects together color the world as a rather dark and dreary place, even when Ganondorf isn't at large, despite it typically having bright colors and characters. Even in the most dire of times, the people of Hyrule seem to be completely helpless to save themselves, until the hero appears at least. Even with very minor issues. Almost every game has various people coming to Link with requests to save them from something or help them with some minor task, even small things that they should honestly be handling themselves. And all this together is the true theme of all the stories, rather than the prophecy that they seek to complete every time there's an issue. And their reliance on this prophecy to be completed, and their reliance on the hero, can be seen when it doesn't come true as well, along with when it just outright fails. Stepping back again to the beginning of Wind Waker, it states that the hero disappeared after his job was complete, but afterwards the darkness threatened the world once again, and he never returned, leaving Hyrule to fend for itself or completely succumb to the destruction of the darkness that was spreading across the land. Instead of fighting back the darkness with their own power, the entirety of Hyrule succumbed and were nearly destroyed completely, until the very gods themselves flooded the entire world in an attempt to subdue the darkness, resulting in the whole world becoming separated by a massive amount of water, and the population of various races to be reduced to very minimal numbers. Because their prophecy didn't come true, the race of Hyrule failed. Their reliance, and the very theme of their reliance, on the hero caused the destruction of everything they held dear. Had they tried to fight back against the threat and use the powers they had remaining, or perhaps tried to make a new hero since the old one did not return, they might have been able to prevent the world from being flooded with water. But they refused, instead of focusing on just praying for the hero's return, and that someone or something would save them. Then Zelda, without having any independence of her own outside of supporting the now long-gone Link, ends up just being another victim, and possibly even a target of blame, though we have no indication of that. The only thing we're told is that she lived on, becoming Tetra's ancestor and somehow forming a pirate crew as she stayed in hiding, although this could have been one of her many children. But considering this, it's possible that she or her descendant had to live life on the run early on, having become unable to settle down until her family was nothing but pirates. Meanwhile, Ganondorf, or Ganon as he was better known at that point, was also just being treated as a creature by the people at large. Just a mindless force of destruction, similar to how he is in Breath of the Wild now. But he became sort of a calamity that swallowed the world and no one was able to defeat. We're given no indication that they tried to stop it either, that anyone tried to step up and be the hero that wasn't there. They merely prayed to the gods. They merely waited until it was far too late to wait any longer, and the world was flooded with water, surrendering it to the calamity they couldn't finish themselves. But despite how most of the video has been me using Wind Waker as an example, this theme is not only present in Wind Waker itself. You can see this in older Zelda games as well. The first one is go kill Ganon, he's evil. The second one is stop Ganon from coming back. Link to the Past, stop Aghanim, Ganon's alter ego. Twilight Princess, stop Zant, who's being guided by Ganondorf. And all the while, Zelda's either a minor supporting role, sometimes with a good reason like Twilight Princess, and Ganondorf is simply evil. Often for the sake of it. While the people around you either cheer you on or pray, barely lifting a finger for themselves except those closest to Link, who know he needs help and needs something right then, and those that don't know him often ask for something in return to suit their own needs. And once Link is gone, they panic and wait. They wait to be saved. They wait in Twilight Princess, unable to handle the monsters Twilight created. They wait in Breath of the Wild, for 100 years, unable to stop the calamity without Link or Zelda. They even wait and pray in Majora's Mask, a game that has no designated Link, no hero, no darkness, no princess. They wait and pray for someone to save them. Most people don't even try to understand why the moon is dropping, only that it is, and so they run or they pray for their lives. So it's all these things in the end, all these aspects coming together in one way or another for each story that creates the real theme. It's not there is always a hero, a princess, and darkness, but there must be, in order for the world to feel protected. Within each story there is a Link that is forced into a role he didn't want, a Zelda that is simply told to play her part, and darkness that is treated nothing more than a beast. The people of Hyrule rely on this ideal, and create the world with that ideal in mind. Instead of stepping away from this entire prophecy, and stepping forward to become the hero themselves, or to ease the burden of the princess, they simply sit back and try to protect themselves, constructing a religious belief that they do not need to do anything to try and stop the darkness, as someone else would show up and do it for them. They just had to pray and wait for that day to come. That is the legend of Zelda.